What's a great story about think something people can watch out for or can pay attention to get surveys right?
I will take it in the inverse if you don't mind. There's just so many things they get wrong. Here's a tip. Don't send your survey from a do not reply address. Don't do that.
Hi, I'm Matt Egol, host of the CX and Culture Connection, the podcast for leaders looking to drive impact by focusing on their CX and culture together. I'm really excited to talk today to Martha Brooke, who I've known for a little while through our involvement together at the CXPA. She does a wonderful roundtable on B2B that I've always enjoyed, and I've been a part of that and seeing her and collaborating at events together. So she's really a great resource to the CXPA, and I'm thrilled to have her on the show today. Martha is the Chief Customer Experience Analyst at Interaction Metrics. So we're going to geek out on surveys today together.
Sounds good. I'm excited.
Thanks for being on the podcast, Martha.
Absolutely. It's totally my pleasure. I love doing pods.
Cool. So why don't we get started? You focus a lot on like the B2B space. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that and about the roundtable you do, and what are some of the key themes that you focus on?
Sure. So I like that question. It's really interesting with the B2B roundtable that I started, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago. There was a lot of chatter in the group about how similar consumer and B2B customer experience is. And as the host, I try to not interject too much. I'm just there to kind of facilitate and move things along. But I always disagreed. I was like, no, they're quite different, really. And as the group has matured, they've seen it more as it's really quite different than consumer CX. So it's different in a couple of ways, which we can get into. But I think that's really the takeaway is that the group has matured in its understanding of this distinctions between the two.
hmm I started myself on the consumer side. We're in the retail and consumer and travel and hospitality. But then over time, I actually ended up doing a lot of B2B stuff. One, because some retailers are actually B2B. If you think about like Sam's Club or Costco or Staples, they're actually selling to businesses. And there's actually a lot of consumers that have professional customers in hair care and lawn and garden and other things like that. So I ended up learning about B2B, even though I thought of myself as a consumer guy. And then later, as I did more digital and customer experience work, I became cross-industry. But there are some pretty significant distinctions, but there are some shared interests around experience design and insights and journey orchestration. It's just the scale and some of the tools are a little different. And I'm sure I have a perspective on that.
Right, right. Well, even companies like, people think of Nike as a consumer company, sort of, but where they make their big money is selling pallets to Nordstrom and the sneaker shops. And do you know what I mean? And that's really where the big money is, I think, is B2B.
Well, another way to think of this is like the hybrid, which I think you're talking about. Coca-Cola sells through millions of stores up and down the street. Like there's they actually have a pretty large e-commerce business selling to, so the kind of the service is not just truck rolls to the small stores. They now actually do a lot through Salesforce and other platforms around how they engage millions of stores around the world. Or I did some work for Lego on B2B experience. Basically, how do you optimize the experience for store owners?
Right. So with B2B, it's about the partnership, which is very different than consumer, that there truly is a two-way dialogue. And as much as companies might say that their customers are on the consumer side, customers are part of the experience, it's sort of true. But with B2B, there truly is a two-way dialogue where both companies benefit by accelerating and expanding the relationship, right? Also, because so much more money is at stake, there's a lot of ramifications of that. Like one, With B2B, the expectations are just so much higher, and there's so many more players involved. With consumer, you buy a pair of sneakers, end of story. But when the store is buying, there's going to be procurement and all kinds of different roles involved in the experience. And like I say, the expectation is just that much higher because it's thousands or millions of dollars, not a $500 pair of shoes.
I think you make a great point that, like, when we talk about the voice of the customer, with the consumer, we're talking about, like, what was their experience when they check out of a hotel or when they finish an e-commerce purchase or they finish a flight. And increasingly, we can engage them during the journey versus after. But, with B2B, the value bundle, the voice of the customer is really about getting at the value and bundle, whether your value prop is landing with the customer and whether you're delivering on your brand promise, which has a whole lot of extra stuff in the profit service chain that are relevant for how you whether you actually deliver on that.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So I'd love to kind of dive in a little bit into your expertise around how do you design the research so you get the right insights to develop and optimize that value bundle, because there are a lot of things that can go wrong in trying to get the insights that kind of like don't do this at home without the right experts, right?
Right, exactly, exactly, yeah. So my company, Interaction Metrics, which is really way too polysyllabic, but interaction, like we're having an interaction metrics, like there's a number on it. We're all about expert customer feedback, like finding out how those interactions really went. And what I sometimes one of my favorite metaphors is just because you have a Photoshop license does not make you a graphic designer, and just because you have a Medallia license does not make you a data science or a survey surgeon or a survey expert. Um, that's not a knock on Medallia. We need the Medallia, Alchemer, Qualtrics. We need those survey platforms. It's just there's how you use them, which it really makes the difference, right? So, and I'd even say that most of the platforms they're really quite similar in terms of what they're providing, but it's the how, and we can go as deep into that as you'd like, Matt.
Well, I guess, you know, if you think about designing insights, I like to think about like what's your learning agenda? What are you trying to learn? How do you work with clients kind of get first things first? Like what are they trying to build insights on before you jump right in and design a survey?
Sure. So it's what is the objective? Are we looking at the past year? Like, what were your all of your interactions about? All right, with procurement, with operations, with delivery, with manufacturing. What was all of that about? Or are we talking just a pulse touch point survey? Right, just like what happened at the end of the tech support call? What happened at the end of the repair or warranty incident? So I'm talking very B2B here, but this applies to consumer too. But
Let's focus on B2B for a little bit. Yeah.
so first of all, it's like what are we trying to learn about? And then there is, as a scientist person, it's what's your hypothesis, right? Well, like what do you think? Let's get that on the table so we can prove or disprove your hypotheses. And I always ask clients to either share any market research or surveys they've done in the past, or make a laundry list of all the things that they really want to know about. And then we roll up the sleeves and get to work and really talk about what's needed, what's the we don't want to leave anything off the table that needs to be on the table, but we also don't want anything extra on the table. No one wants a survey that's too long or exhaustive or repetitive in any way. So it's like we maximize the insights, but we try to minimize and scale down the questions that are being asked and make them interesting. I think there too many surveys suffer from really boring templated questions. And that just creates a kind of like, oh, well, whatever, kind of response.
I like your kind of view about like starting with the end of mind and then coming up with a list of questions. Like, I had a guest on the podcast. I also did a review of their book of Oded Netzer and Paul Mangone's book, Data Driven Decisions. And you could see the previous podcast on the screen. Like Oded is the head of the Data Institute at Columbia. And he also does a lot of work with Amazon as a consultant. And so he shared this framework I know you'll love called IWIC. I wish I knew. And basically, if you engage executives about what they wish they knew, then you build a backlog of things that you want to build insights about. And you're more likely to drive change in decisions if the insights actually align to what people wish they knew.
Right, and you don't have to jam everything that they wish they knew into one tool. Like, you can separate them out. There can be open-ended journalistic style interviews for some I wish I knew, and there can be pulse surveys for some I wish I knew, and some more comprehensive interaction surveys for what I wish I. So, yeah, it doesn't all need to go into the same tool, which is oftentimes what the predisposition of clients. Like, let's just do it all, and it's like, no.
I often find that, like, when I get asked to work on, like, quote, modernizing customer insights capabilities, or helping think about, customer experience broadly, of which customer listening is a key element of, along with other things they're doing, like experience design and culture and so forth. Um, that it actually helps to think about what are we actually putting into kind of our ongoing survey, or like a relationship survey or transactional surveys, versus actually these are things that we shouldn't be trying to answer through the survey. We should do other research into them. And I like to break it out actually into research, customer listening, and experiments. And that actually your research are things that are more uh, bespoke. You might use other tools like qual and quan, or ethnography, or big data analytics, mining unstructured data. There's a whole host of tools that can go into research, qual and quant, that you don't jam it into your customer survey. There are other things that you can actually learn about in your customer survey, where if you think of it as like, a set of ongoing questions, and some questions you might change, like in a panel. So that if you have ongoing data, you actually can, like, in a given year, get some additional insights beyond the stuff you get every year. And then what's really growing now with AI is experimentation. Like, let's go try that. And in fact, you learn a lot from that, that you increasingly, the experiments can even be simulated with AI, with, like, as opposed to even before you take it into the market. I would recommend both, simulate it, and but decide, is the right way to do this research, survey, or experiments?
Right. I mean, a classic question I get asked from the very beginning is, "Do you do NPS surveys?" And it's like, "Sure." "Well, what do you wanna know?" "Well, we wanna know how our customer service center is doing." Okay, well, that's not an NPS survey. Let's listen, maybe use AI, probably use AI to listen to the customer service center and evaluate those calls and test them humanistically against the AI tools, so that we really know what's the quality of those interactions, and are we putting the right metrics and priorities on those. It has nothing to do with NPS score.
Or to put a slight twist on that, I agree. Um, you might actually flip the order, and do some research and experiments first, and then modify your survey based on what you learn. So, for example, I did some work with a consumer electronics retailer that has a call center of 300 people that does inbound orders. So when people want help on, like, what camera or equipment or podcasting gear you want, instead of going to the store or e-commerce, you can actually call, and they get pretty big orders this way, both B2B as well as consumer orders, because it's a high touch model with the right experts on the phone. And they wanted to optimize the way the people in the call center engaged, and create a continuous improvement quality cycle to drive the right behaviors to shift the curve for everybody. So we didn't look at their Medallia surveys to optimize that. What we did is we looked at hundreds of calls, and then we observed people and we interviewed people. And then we came up with the four emotions we wanted and the behaviors that get them, and we showed it drive results. And then we modified the survey to incorporate a few questions based on what we learned for the specific emotions we wanted. We wanted people to feel relaxed, supported, confident, and optimistic. It's like a crescendo. And then we wanted to, those were closed questions, Likert scores. And then we added it to all the other questions they had in there, and we had to make trade-offs to it didn't get too long. And then we had some open questions like, what did they do to make you feel that way that you can mine with AI?
I think let's double click on that because I think clients so often start with just the NPS survey. It's just like kind of almost built into the brain, NPS survey. And yet there's this multitude of tools, and they all need to be sort of customized to exactly what you want to know. What do you really want to know? And yeah, and I just think that's what one of the things that's really interesting about our field of customer experience right now is that I think it's become more expansive. There are more tools. I think that it's just become a more interesting field year by year.
I know you have a lot of stories around things that go right, but also things that go wrong. Leave it up to you which type of story you want to tell right now. We can cover both, but what 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 are what's a great story about like think something people may can watch out for or can pay attention to get surveys right?
Right. Well, let's. I will take it in the inverse if you don't mind. There's just so many things they get wrong. So, starting with here's a tip: don't send your survey from a do not reply address. Don't do that. There are two reasons to not do that. One, what's the signal? Don't reply. The other is there's no chance to reply. And there are customers, we always, in any survey we have in the field, we always hear from, so we never do that. We always hear from at least a couple of customers who say, look, I don't want to take your survey, but I will tell you what's going on with the relationship, blah, 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 blah. This is invaluable information. And oh, by the way, there are people, you just directly hear, oh, he's been retired for 50 years, or not 50, 5 years, or he did, whatever it is. But you get to have a chance to clean the list. You get to hear from customers who just won't take the survey, but still have a lot to say. And oh, by the way, you're signaling it's actually coming from a real, in our case, research at da 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 account. So it signals like you really you're there to listen. So that's a tip. Just don't do it that way. Have your engineers set it, work with us, or have your engineers set it up so it's definitely not coming from a do not reply. Um, so objectivity, I think that always comes up. I think when in-house teams design their surveys, they can't help but subscribe to the 180 cognitive biases that we all have. Um, it's just human nature. There are reasons why we have cognitive biases. In the hunter and gatherer days, it made us quicker in terms of our decision making, in terms of fleeing the prey. So cognitive bias has a purpose. I think it's important to acknowledge it, but not in your survey. And so working with an outsider, if you can't, if it's just not in your field of possibility, if you can't work with an outside consultant, working with at least an outside team who has outside eyes on your survey to try to get your questions as neutral as possible. So for instance, don't ask, how satisfied are you with? That's a leading construct, right? It assumes you're somewhat satisfied. Ask, please rate the expertise of the engineer you worked with, or so keep it as neutral as possible. That's another tip. And all too often I see surveys that really are just full of these leading, even NPS really, if you think about it, is a leading construct. It assumes you're somewhat likely to recommend. How likely are you to recommend? You're somewhat likely to recommend. That said, NPS has a place in our CX world because it's such a trackable, benchmarkable metric. So, um, in any event, it's very important to stay objective if you're really looking for real data because you really want to know. So we see problems with objectivity all the time. And we see that's oftentimes like the wrong departments are just involved in the survey. Like too much of the list comes from IT, for instance, and that's where you get like with Bank of America, they always send me a dear Martha Brooke, and it's Martha Brooke screaming in caps. Well, we would always say, let's clean that list up, make a title case, and it's Hi Martha, uppercase M, ARTHA, lowercase. It's just like be friendly. Don't scream. Like just take that extra 2 hours it took to clean up the list. But the problem there was that the list just resided with IT and no one in the survey analyst group really had eyes on it. So sometimes the wrong departments are involved. Sometimes it's just overly subjective. Sometimes it's just simply engineered the wrong way and it's coming from the wrong email address.
How would you think surveys are changing? What are some of the main ways they're changing, either because of growth of mobile and social, or and the emergence of AI? Like they're getting shorter, they're becoming more conversational. Like what are some of the ways surveys are changing because of these factors?
Yeah, I think they are becoming more conversational, and that's simply the culture, our social culture. I think they've become, good surveys are as conversational, journalistically conversational as possible. AI is kind of a nice, I call it an overlap tool. It touches lots of different parts. It's not good at designing the survey, but it can be a useful editor. We put a lot of stress on how you invite people to take the survey. That's really, really important in terms of getting good response and getting representative response. And AI can be a nice kind of editor tool to expedite things. Again, it's not a very good writer, in my opinion, but it is a decent editor. Yeah, so yeah, I think there are some subtle changes and some profound changes going on.
I definitely hear your point about like being careful about how you use AI to generate the survey, as more than input, right? Um, in terms of like how it changes the nature of the surveys, I'm curious if you see shorter surveys with the mix of closed and open questions changes because now we can use AI to mine open questions. You start seeing more shorter surveys where some things that people, like, for example, I mentioned a moment ago, what did they make you what did they do to make you feel that way? That's the type of question you might in the past have cringed from asking because it would take a lot of manual effort to analyze it. But now with AI, it's actually better than asking several closed questions.
Well, one thing about using AI for the open-end analysis is it does derive a good summary of all of the open ends. But if you look line by line, it's not very good. And the reason it's not very good is because uh, usually a good survey has multiple open ends, right? And customers repeat themselves. It's just a fact. And so AI over indexes on certain themes, and we've worked every kind of math model around that, and and worked with countless AI tools, and they all do that. So for our line by line reading on customers, it's not that good. In terms of a summary of kind of what's in those open ends, I think it's pretty good. In terms of the summary of each customer interview, I think it's a pretty good tool. So do we see more open ends? I would say not necessarily, because companies still love those ranking questions. It's so directional for companies. But in terms of the analysis, it impacts it somewhat.
How do you see the role of emotions and getting at emotions being addressed through surveys and other research?
Yeah, I think emotions are really interesting. So I would love to double click on the emotions because emotions are the heart of experience. Right? Like that's really what we mean by experience is how did it make you feel? What was was there joy? Was there frustration? Was there hesitation? Was there annoyance? Like these are all interesting and vital emotions to any experience.
One of the things I'd love to dive a little more into, Martha, is the importance of emotion, which we know is like what makes experiences meaningful and memorable and are so critical. How do you think about addressing emotion in the work that you do?
Yeah, I just wanna sort of emphasize that there is no experience without emotion, like that they're kind of one and the same, right? And, there's experiences of joy and hesitation and annoyance and irritation and elation and surprise, like, all of that is part of the experience and needs to be addressed in different ways. Um, Sometimes customers are not as verbal about their emotions as we'd like them to be. And so sometimes it's best to watch the do this ethnography and actually watch them in the field.
Well, emotion is such a critical part of winning experience, designing winning experiences. Let's take a quick break to look at a couple mastermind groups that I'm launching. One of which is Winning Experience, and then we'll continue the conversation on the other side. Allow me to briefly interrupt the podcast to share an invitation for you to join one of our mastermind groups. These groups are for leaders building out the CX function at their organization. They are for culture champions looking to develop and sustain behaviors that bring their organization's mission, vision, purpose, and values to life. I'm excited to team with Randy Rothenberg, former CEO of the IAB, on a mastermind group focused on experience as a winning marketing strategy. I'm teaming with Tamar Cohen, who has led CX and EX teams at Zoetis and Travelers, on another group focused on CX EX alignment, and with Greg Kihlstrom, host of the Agile Brand podcast, on a group focused on building a self-funding growth flywheel. Each group meets monthly for 90 minutes. Members receive a coaching hour each month and can attend quarterly workshops. Go to JourneySpark's website for more information. Please DM me on LinkedIn with any questions. Now, let's get back to the podcast. I was really enjoying our conversation about the role of emotion in customer experience, Martha. I'm one of the things that I think is an enormous opportunity is actually to build insights about the emotions, then weave it into your listening, but then also do ongoing work with AI to like mine and think about conversations, whether it's in a call center or emails or social media or increasingly video meetings. You got to be careful there, not to be creepy. But there's a lot of data now to actually optimize training and improve behavior of people in the organization through the insights. So there's so much richer insights than just the surveys alone. I'm curious where you see this in your work.
Yeah, so we do some training of AI. So oftentimes the out of the box models aren't quite nuanced enough to pick up exactly the right sentiment. They can be overly generalized, like in terms of, positive, negative, neutral, with just a few emotions in between. And so we'll sometimes work with the rules that AI has been trained on to refine those rules to pick up more of the nuances within emotion. So, and to your point, emotion is just so key. For us, it really comes in more in the ethnographies. That's the more where you're listening to this call may be monitored, right? Where you're actually listening to the calls or examining the email responses and looking for what are the words being exchanged and what are the implicit emotions there, and then bucketing emotions and thinking about it that way. And not sure how much you and I have spoken in the past about surveys and some of their limitations in terms of getting at emotion, but uh, customers aren't always the best readers in retrospect on how they felt, but they're always feeling as they go through an experience. So the more that we can be there in the experience with them, through the phone call, through the email, through the chat, the more accurate our read on the quality of the interaction or the quality of the experience was.
Do you see the lines blurring where what used to be, conversation is now insight? Like how do we, for example, when you get a text, how is your stay going at a hotel? or you get a text from the store manager, "Hey, come back in. We've got such and such here." And you have this relationship marketing that is increasingly automated with bots. And now people are trying to use this with insights, which is, in a way, it's building on what used to be called insights to action with like She Speaks and Buzz Agent and Cafe Mom, where companies would essentially provoke people to engage and then mine insights out of it. The problem is it's not, it's technically it's a little biased in the research if you're doing that. But so you're getting really good insights and you're activating, but you're actually influencing the conversation by the way you engage with people.
Right, right. I mean, I always like, some of the brand perception questions, like if this were a party, what kind of party would it be? If this were an animal, what kind of animal would it be? Those are, kind of typical David Ogilvy type, questions. But it also, what are the three words that come to mind about this interaction? Um, so some of that, I find some of that really interesting and important kind of line of inquiry.
Do you think it's okay to generate insights directly out of those conversations? Like to basically, because like now those chatbot conversations are orders of magnitudes higher than the surveys and the call center verbatims. You've got hundreds of millions of what's in the B2C world, hundreds of millions of messages. Which creates a whole new fertile place beyond just social media to mine insights because they're having conversations with the consumers.
I mean, I think you always have to disclose what the possible inclusions and exclusions of any research methodology are.
So it's a both and probably. You wouldn't
Yeah,
want to rely purely on that given some of the limitations of what we just talked about.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah. I'd like to pivot back to another question on B2B for a second.
Sure.
There are some, you know, markets where, experience management is fairly new still, where it's fascinating when you work with them, sometimes you find they've never done a customer listening before. Like it could be, construction firms, accounting firms, architectural firms that like are actually, often project oriented that may not have done it before. So, how do you think about like helping someone like that get started if they've never done it before, and getting them to lean in and get the value out of experience management and customer listening and insights?
I love that question, Matt, because I think people like us in the customer experience world are just so think about everybody's thinking about customer experience. In fact, we we work with companies all the time that, well, they've done some kind of Microsoft Forms survey or they're just not tuned into it. They don't even the NPS they don't necessarily know what that is, and that's a lot of engineering, accounting companies. Their core competency is not customer experience. They don't think about it, but it's beginning to inkle into their Weltanschauung, as it were. It's beginning to come in. And I always encourage them to think teams. Like, let's workshop. Like, let's have them get together. Sometimes with an outside consultant like you, sometimes with a survey expert like me. But the point is, and sometimes just internally.
We could do it together. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. But work in teams and just talk. Start talking about experience. Start with not even anything about your firm. What are great experiences you've had? What are bad experiences you've had? How might this reflect or relate to the experience that we provide as XYZ engineering firm, right? So getting the conversation going in small teams and then maybe multidisciplinary teams, so where the IT is talking to the finance people, et cetera, and just getting that conversation going so that they can internally start crafting a plan toward, well, what do we really need to know, what do we really want to know. But that's what I always encourage is start as workshops, start as just simple conversations, and I think that can go a long way toward then overlapping a vocabulary of customer experience on top of it, and then bringing in some research tools to really explore what is the quality of the relationship. I always ask companies to ask how satisfied do you think do you think your customers are happy? Which customers? In which situations, you know? Because it's never customer experience aggregate, it's customer experience for whom in what situation. So, there's a lot that can be explored in that workshop to start developing an appreciation of customer experience and then some really good what do we need to know questions.
How do you see the space evolving in the future? What are some of the things that you think people should pay attention to? Some of the trends, some of the things to look for in terms of how the space is evolving.
Yeah, I like that. I what I would hope for is that there becomes less and less distance to the point of no distance. Of course, it could be creepy. So, we have to monitor this. There's the creepy factor, but that there's no distance between the company knowing how the experience went and the experience happening in real time. That the two are happening together, that the information is being sucked out, immediately and being fed to the right teams. And that there's an immediate feedback loop. It's not a week later, month later, year later, whatever. It's an immediate with I'm so sorry this happened to you. Let's make it right when something bad happened, right? And so instead of those 30-day delays with American Airlines or, whatever it is, where it's immediate, like this is what happened to the customer, this is what we need to do, the right team coming in so that there's less and less of a gap in terms of time and space between the experience and the insight and the reaction from the company. That's what I hope for. And I think that's one of the things that some of the tools that you and I talk about can help make that possible. Um, I believe that there's nothing more important than our interactions. And so getting it right about interactions will make a better world.
One of the things that I'm really, excited about is the chance to connect employee experience and employee training and behavior more tightly with customer listening to create a stronger feedback loop. And right now, a lot of the only place that gets really used is listening to a sample of calls in the call center, but and then maybe you get some surveys for some of that, but the chance to really drive a stronger connection to employee behavior and habit building with customer listening is actually really ripe right now. Uh, because what you can do is if you identify the behaviors that you want, you can then look for ways to pick up listening signals to see whether you're getting them, and that could be in your survey, it could be in your social, it could be in messaging, it could be in the call center, it could be in emails, it could be a variety of things that you're able to get more of a data signal back on whether you're actually getting the behaviors and emotions you want.
Sure. Yeah, because there are only uh, two ways experiences are created. They're either created digitally or they're created through employees. And so the more again, the tighter, the less distance in time and space there is between employees and customers and their interactions, the more equipped we are to create better interactions and create a better world.
Yeah, I would encourage people to think about these together more. How does our customer listening and our employee behavior programs, like our change management, go together rather than treating them separately, which too many companies do, which is the employee side is very focused on employee engagement and HR oriented things versus connecting it to customer experience. And there's a huge opportunity to drive CX through EX.
Right. What we find within companies, the way that there's this divide between sales and marketing, there's this divide, and which should not exist, right? The two should be the left foot and the right foot. There's this divide between HR and its employee engagement, workplace satisfaction surveys, workplace, all of that, and then the customer satisfaction team. And that there is for many companies that they're very siloed and HR wants to own the employee engagement and the operations customer satisfaction people want to own their side. And so we have to work very diligently to get the two more into a dialogue together.
One of the things that I've been really encouraged by is seeing more It doesn't happen enough places, but to see some customer experience leaders teaming more with HR, whether it's the chief experience, chief revenue, chief customer, CMO, teaming with the head of HR on driving the change into the organization. In fact, in some of the mastermind groups that I have, I now have HR leaders that have become part of the mastermind groups because they want to collaborate with CX in their organization. So while in my mastermind groups, I'll have several people per company attend, and one of them's HR, which in some cases HR initiated that for their company, and I applaud them for that because they're really reinforcing this opportunity.
Absolutely applaud them for like that. That's huge that you're getting that kind of involvement from HR, because we just observe a lot of resistance from many companies from their HR department, and I don't know why.
It's a bit of self-selection here, Martha, because I'm focused on how CX and culture go together.
Hmm.
So when I talk to people about CX and culture and they raise their hand, they want to be part of it. That's HR cares a lot about culture. So that's how I hook them,
Okay, okay, I
to
like
get
it.
there. I start with culture and then I expand to CX from there.
Yeah, I like it. Okay.
Yeah. It's been a lot of fun. I guess, I really enjoyed our conversation. You've sparked a lot of good ideas for me. Is there anything, you would leave our audience with of things that they should do to learn more about you or get in touch with you, website or LinkedIn or anything like that?
Sure. So our website is interactionmetrics.com. So again, interaction like we're having an interaction, metrics like the number. You can Google on it, and we come to the top. And we've been in business so long, we come to the top for a lot of customer experience Google searches. And then I like email, old fashioned email. So I'm Martha Brooke, Martha B at interactionmetrics.com, or your LinkedIn works. Not involved in the Instagram, the other social media, but LinkedIn is perfectly fine way to get a hold of me too.
What I would encourage everyone to follow Martha, definitely check out her B2B roundtables with the
Yes.
CXPA. And I look forward to seeing you at future events, Martha.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Matt. Enjoyed it.
Great to have you on the podcast.
Yep. Bye for now.